stand and begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Good. Well, welcome back. All you crowds of people. So, we're covering book 6 today, and I guess I don't have to speak up. For point of order 2, we'll have a hiatus. After this class, we won't meet again until after Easter, until Easter Saturday. So, Tax Day, April 15th, will be when we reconvene for book 7, because there's a Legion thing next Saturday. That's why this had to be moved. And then it's cleanup day, and then it's the vigil. So let's see. All right, book 6. We have 2 digressions from Augustine's biography. First of Monica, and then Alypius. And each has its own conversion story to bracket Augustine's. And all 3 of them give a clear moral, which is fun. It's a very moralistic book. Also, we want to keep in mind that this is when we really turn the corner on the temptation towards ambition. It's kind of how that temptation is resolved, or mostly resolved. As we've kind of seen, like looking at the 3 books, 2, 3, and 4, and 6, 7, and 8. It's not exactly. It's not like mathematical. Like this is the problem. This is the problem. This is the solution. But it's general. It's generally the problem. Generally the problem, etc. Generally is the solution. But because all the temptations are tied together in sin, they bleed into each other. And just because he mostly resolves ambition, once we get to the end of book 6, doesn't mean it's 100% gone. But it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know if you guys are reading this with that in mind. Also, it's nice that sometimes, like I've said before, when you approach it with a theme in mind, you're kind of looking for this. How is this going to be shown? Then things can jump out at you. And so we're going to see other examples of ambition instead of just Augustine in book 6, in places you might not expect to see it. So, also, there are, as we've seen before, there are the 3 problems with Christianity that troubled Augustine most, which is why he was looking to the Manichees, where does evil come from, and how does God have a corporeal form? Those will be solved in book 7. The other one is, can the patriarchs be considered just, which was solved in the previous book 5 for the most part, but it's also briefly touched upon here. So moving into our paragraphs. To begin with paragraph 1, another little translation note that Chadwick, that's book 7, there it is. The Chadwick here renders quadrupedibus as animals. And I think we saw that last time, where quite literally it means 4-footed. Because I think the last time it was one way of looking at the various creatures that he lists was looking at how they move themselves around. In this case, we might ask, where is this? Why Augustine singles out just the 4-footed creatures and birds? Like what? Yeah, go to the very first line, right? Because you did not make me, and did you not make me, and make me superior to the animals, make me wiser than the birds of heaven? So yes, he's quoting, but still, previously he mentioned we had other creatures, we had snakes and stuff. So, any ideas about why those two 4-foot, those 2 other creatures, 4-footed beasts and birds? I have my ideas too, And then curiosity. So this is what I propose, that, so birds can see better than man can, right? But they lack wisdom, which is the knowledge of invisible causes. And four-footed creatures can move, and typically move much faster than man. But they can't move any closer to God. So, because the next thing he says is, I was walking through darkness in a slippery place. I was seeking you outside myself, and failed to find failed to find the God of my heart. And the previous thing that he said before that was, again, did you not make me wiser? For it's spirited animals wiser than the birds of heaven. So, again, one of the ways, at least that I propose, that you can look at those is that in the material realm, there's motion and vision materially, and there's motion and vision interiorly or spiritually. That is where it's in man's rational capacity to be superior to the animals. And this is also how he sees God and draws close to God. And it's also the thing that Augustine is struggling with the physical conception of God. How are we close to God? How are we far away from God? So, yeah, all materialistic conceptions of God are going to make you seek God outside of yourself, in something else. Little translation note here. Chadwick says, in all dangers, serenely, he's talking about Monica, in all dangers, serenely confident in you. Is this talking about Monica yet? Yeah.
My mother.
Yeah. And then later, again, he says, she was already free from anxiety. In both cases, the word that he uses is secura to describe Monica, which doesn't, of course, mean carefree, free from anxiety, but you could also translate it as secure. Both being secure in one place, anyway, and being free from cares, it's the same thing, just kind of a different way of looking at it. And since one of the things that Augustine is pursuing here is that peace and that rest, that stability or security in God, I think it's helpful to know that that's the word that he uses, both for serenely confident and free from anxiety. It's the same word, secure. We also have an immediate parallel to that too. Monica is not overwhelmed to hear that Augustine has left the Manichees. She had faith in her earlier vision. And so Monica has both sight and motion also. Right? She moves through the uncertain world by means of her certainty, which she has attained through a vision given by God. And so she's not surprised because she sees spiritually through this same vision, through the same certainty. And then she is secure. So she moves while being secure. She's moving in the world, but she's not moving in her soul. Her soul is secure in God. And that's why she can move about through the world so confidently. And that's why she's not so surprised. It also is a good contrast between her and the sinner. Because the sinner's soul, the sinner can be at rest in the world, externally peaceful, but his soul is not at rest. His soul is not secure. Another translation note, still in paragraph 1, Chadwick says that she had confidence that, quote, before she departed this life, she would see me a baptized Catholic believer. And that's how he's translating Fidelem Catholicum. And a faithful Catholic, and that's how she translates it, would be a better translation. Maybe it's quibbling too much, but still. So, I think this is an interesting question, and so I will ask you it. After all this, Monica's great security, her not being surprised, then he mentions how she redoubles her petitions and begs, that she, begging you to hasten your help and enlighten my darkness. Well, why would she do that then? If she's so confident in her vision, why is she now redoubling her petitions? What does that mean? Is that, any answers? He just kind of leaves that out there, but I don't know if did that strike you as odd also?
Because she looks at hasten, so I have a feeling which probably isn't wrong for her to think that she wanted to happen before she died, like she wanted to see it, but that's kind of selfish.
That's that's in the vision though. Remember in her vision, she has herself and Augustine on the same rule. And so her vision tells her that Augustine will be Catholic before she dies.
Is the double because she's praying for it to happen, but also praying in thanksgiving of already some of it had happened?
Maybe. But I don't know, it doesn't, that Thanksgiving note doesn't come in here. Like she's definitely pursuing this. It's not, so I think one of the things that he's doing, so the quietist position would basically be let go and let God. In the sense that like, well, God's going to take care of everything. I don't have to do anything, right? If God wants to convert it, God said it's going to happen, therefore it's going to happen. And I can just sit home and watch TV. That's one of my, the TV show Lost is in my view, the best TV show ever. And in it, they have some great time travel stuff. And they're debating what the characters that have been there in the past, 1977. And there's an evil character in their present, but it's a child in the past, and they're debating what to do. Some of them want to kill the evil character when he's a child, and some of them say you can't do that; it's impossible because you can't change the past. And so the ones who say, well, you can't change the past, we're just not going to do anything because there's no point. I'm not going to change anything. And then others of them say, well, we're going to try anyway. And so they try to change the past. So they try to kill the kid. But what happens is it's their attempt to kill him that kind of accelerates or sets him on the path to being the evil character. So it preserves the integrity of the present. It's a nice trick with time travel. Time travel is impossible. It's a nice trick. And I think one of the reasons why I like the show is time travel is impossible, but that's kind of how God works. In the sense that he's working through Monica, he's working through his creatures. Our petitions, our prayers, our sacrifices are foreknown by God and incorporated into his providence. So God wills that we participate in his saving work. So it's not just that we just say, all right, well, God's going to do it. God is going to do it, and he's going to do it in part, through you, through your actions, through your prayers, through your sacrifices, through these other things. So Monica knows that it will be affected, but she also knows that it's going to be affected in part because of her prayers. So that's why she redoubles her prayers. Because she knows I need to play my part. That it's God's present, so the vision is a future vision. That's God's present, if you will. Like with our characters in Lost, Monica is in the past, though, so to speak, and doing her part to make that present reality. Like she still has to do it. Just like, although they didn't know it, the characters in Lost had to pursue Linus, the bad guy, in order to make their present a reality. Yes?
I don't want to get off track, but why didn't they go back and try to change him to be good instead of trying to kill him?
That's a good question. They didn't. They're going back in time was accidental. They weren't intending to go back in time. They got trapped. They got thrown back there and trapped there.
I've never seen it.
Yeah. That's a good. There were some other political forces and these other things going on, but that is a good question. It wouldn't have, according to the Lost version of time travel, wouldn't have mattered anyway because you can't change the past. That's basically what the TV show, the position that they were taking the TV show, which I kind of like because it works well for these theological understandings that you can't change the past. As one of the characters say, we're just experiencing it for the first time. That, again, whatever you do in the past, nothing or something, will produce, has to produce, the future that you experienced. So, all right, moving on, paragraph 2. Okay, I just caught this time. I mean, I'm sure I saw it previously, but, and I say all this, the reason why I do like Chadwick best, on the whole, and I like using this again, but that partly because I can correct his translations as we go through them, and we're all on the same page, literally. So he says janitor here in the first sentence. It was forbidden by the janitor. The word there is ostario. Osiario. And technically speaking, yes, a literal translation of that is janitor, because it means doorkeeper or doorman. But our version of a janitor is someone very different. So it's not as like the low. When we think janitor, we think like the low. Apologies to any janitors out there, unless you want to grow in humility. It's like the lowest level of work you can have. The ostiario was not a servant, according to O'Donnell, but a functionary in minor orders known from the 3rd century on. So an ostario he's in minor orders. He has a important function to fulfill. He's not, so doorkeeper or something like that would be a better translation. They would be the people in times of persecution who would literally, I believe, guard the doors of the church. In fact, that's in the future. That's what you could do during the next pandemic or something. What I would do is I would just have the doors be locked, and there'd be doormen standing outside, ushers. And if they recognized you, then you could come in, and if they didn't, you couldn't. And that would include everyone, police and everything else. You could say, oh, sorry, the doors are locked. Private residence, you need a search warrant. So that's, like I said, that's what I would do. I think, maybe, I don't know. I haven't been in that position yet, but we've all had time to think about what we'd do. That's what I would do. That's what I would have. Doorman, and if you're known, you're known, and if you're not, you're not. And it's a private building. What can I say? The doors are locked, they don't open. You have a special knock or something, right? So again, that's what search warrants are for. You don't just get to come down and say, do you have too many people in there? I see all these cars. Well, yeah, you see a lot of cars. So what? Okay, moving on. So an important thing to notice, too, when we're talking about, so Monica has this habit of bringing the cakes and bread and wine and stuff to the memorial shrines of the saints. This was, according to Lancel, these were centuries-old Christian customs in North Africa. Originally, they did come from the pagans, but for centuries in North Africa, it had been a Christian thing. And they would have these semicircular concrete benches, right, arranged around the tomb, and they'd be like fenced off plots or even enclosed, like a little house. And you would go out there, you'd have a table in the center of the cemetery, typically with the name of the deceased there, and you would have a banquet, you'd have a party. You'd have a banquet there, because it was your way of communing, sharing with the dead. So it participates in our view of the resurrection of the body, and and also the dead aren't truly dead if they die in Christ. Now, again, this was in part, though, a continuation of the pagan Paternalia, which was done 9 days at the end of winter in February. And it makes sense, as I said last week, how Ambrose was in the forefront of the political fight against the pagan forces trying to sort of reclaim Rome for paganism, like that's where we have this teeter-totter. So it makes a lot of sense that where he is, maybe less so in North Africa, which I'm not sure, but I think was probably perhaps more Christian than pagan. Where he is, that's why he really doesn't want them to be doing this stuff, because it could easily look like the return of the Parthenalia. Other reason too, which we'll go into. We want to highlight, so this is our first digression on Monica. Some virtues of Monica: obedience. She's very obedient to Ambrose, and if you didn't see it, this is our irony, is that Monica does for Ambrose what Augustine won't yet do for God. Monica very quickly turns her will against even her own past habits and actions when she's commanded by a lawful authority. Now, there's a good side on understanding obedience here. It's a very good anecdote, because we see on the part of the subject of obedience that ability to convert her will quickly to the will of the lawful authority. But on the commanding side too, you see what makes it easy for Monica to do is because she has so much respect for Ambrose. That's noted in here too. It's not that she wouldn't have done so, but once she hears it comes from Ambrose, then she has so much confidence in that. That makes her giving her obedience easy. It's a very good note for anyone in a position of authority, that it's one thing to command obedience, but if you want your subjects to receive it well, then the more virtuous you are, the better you are, the more easily they will receive it. The more quickly they will do it, and so on. So we can stand on our rights and say, well, you have to obey me. I'm your boss or whatever, but again, we can make it also easy for our inferiors. Again, on the subjective side, with this note about Monica having tamed her love of wine, the more one has become disciplined about his passions, his lower passions, the more easily he can become obedient. Right? Because you are, instead of following a lower authority, you're following a higher authority. It should be relatively obvious, but if you look at people who have a struggle with obedience, they are going to be more obedient to their passions. And a lot of times you'll see one of them leading to the other, too. All right. Also, because another aspect which makes Monica's case, which makes her situation good, is that she was doing when she was making those offerings, she was doing so for the right reasons. She wasn't doing them for gluttony or these other things, as an excuse just to have a party. And so she's doing it out of piety. And so when Ambrose says, no, we're going to do it a different way, then because the end hasn't changed, piety, she easily changes the means. Whereas if her end had been secretly different, if it had been like, I want to have a party, the party is my end, not piety, then he said no. If he said no party, she would have been, you're kidding me, right? It's also a good way, if you will, sometimes it's important to distinguish between our primary and secondary ends of doing things. We got mixed motives, and it's your first motive, your number one motive is the reason why you do the thing. So her number one motive there is, because you could do it for both perhaps, you could be like, all right, I want to do it for piety, I also enjoy the party. If that's how you would know, is if you were resistant, or if you refused, then it would be because that's really what you wanted. The party was your first motive. But if otherwise, it would be piety. Once again, Monica is presented, as in that theme of motion, as secure, immovable in the faith and in virtue. And it's her immobility in virtue that allows her to change her exterior actions quickly, if that's needed to preserve that security. So again, that internal security, stability that she has, is what makes her quick externally, prompt to obey, like our Blessed Mother with the angel. And we see the contrary, as those who are less secure, like Augustine, are then more immovable in their vice. Also, going back to that theme of the image versus the reality, Monica gives the offerings as a means of worshiping God, and then quickly abandons them when she learns that's counterproductive, because she's focused on the reality, not on the image, not on the means. It's also good for we have a good example of avoiding scandal. Just because something can be done in the right spirit doesn't mean it ought to be. Again, something can be okay in itself, but if it's too similar to what the pagans do, it can give scandal. And the examples I think we could easily think of would be, for instance, Halloween. I'm not going to weigh, well, I will weigh in, I suppose, on the Halloween debate. Great Halloween debate. In the sense that I say it's relative. That because I think what happens is a lot of times people think, in my circumstance, in my town, or in my memory, Halloween was fine. It was just innocuous, and etc. And there's no trouble with it. And I think if that's true, then that's true. The challenge we have is that what if it's not? What if Halloween becomes weaponized, or it becomes more and more pagan, or more and more whatever bad? Then you have to say, okay, it's kind of like the Paternalia trying to make a comeback. We did used to do it, but kind of like with these offerings. Yeah, we used to, and it was fine, but now it's kind of become politicized or identified with this one group, and so now we ought not to do it. So that's how I would resolve the Halloween debate. If you were wondering, following, I say along these lines, I think you could say the same thing for St. Patrick's Day. I would say that I would encourage people not to do any exterior celebrations on St. Patrick's Day, because it has been so thoroughly co-opted by the worldlings as an incredible mockery of sanctity, by being an opportunity for great license. Also because I'm sure St. Patrick would want us to do lots of penance during Lent and not party on his feast day. So, also, moving from matter to spirit, just as Ambrose moves Augustine from matter to spirit when it comes to the Bible, he moves Monica from matter to spirit, from letter to spiritual interpretation, from food offerings to prayer offerings. Or if you like, this is our journey from the outside in. Right, we've given things external, scriptures, retreat, if you will, to an internal meeting. We give it something external, the offerings to the saints or so on externally, and we're moving internally. This is how we move towards God, out from the outside inwards. Chadwick says, instead of a basket full of fruits of the earth, she learned to bring a heart full of purer vows to the memorials of the martyrs, which the purer vows is purgatationibus votis. And that could be, first of all, when he says bring, it's affere, and so that could be translated as offer. And you could say more purified prayers. But that purification, which he does have in the purer vows, is that same word that we have when we talk about purgatory. Also note that stopping the customary eating and drinking at the graves would have violated the Eucharistic fast if you're going to Mass right afterwards. And so, Monica exchanges an earthly feast for a heavenly one. And while we're on it, we have a reference to the Mass, communication of the Lord's body, which is understood as a sacrifice, as it is celebrated where the martyrs were both immolated and crowned in imitation of his passion. If these Christians didn't see the Mass as a sacrifice, as the representation of the sacrifice of the cross, but only a reenactment of the Last Supper, then why would they have done so at the martyrs' tombs, right, on the sites of the martyrs' sacrifice? So I think, again, if you sort of tuck that away, like this is, in a certain sense, it's proof that this wasn't a controversial issue, because it doesn't highlight this as a proof text. But it can be a proof text, because this is an ancient tradition of having Mass offered where the martyrs pay their sacrifice, because it joins those two. It's a sacrificial offering. The martyrs made a sacrificial offering. We're the sacrifice of the Mass and the sacrifice of the cross. That's why we're doing it. And again, it wouldn't make nearly as much sense to do so if it's just a reenactment of the Last Supper meal. Also, all the more reason to separate the meal part too, moving away from that. Slight translation note. Moving into paragraph 3. Augustine's mind is in quiet. Says, I had not yet come to groan in prayer, that you might come to my aid. My mind was intent on inquiry and restless for debate. That's our inquietus once again. Also with the translation, Chadwick says, he, for his part, did not know of my emotional crisis or the abyss of danger threatening me. And for emotional crisis, he's translating the word aestus, which, as it would sound, it's also the word for like the heat of summer or a hot wind. And it, in this case, it refers to burning passions, not exactly emotional crisis. I mean, maybe you could see it in that sense. And the pit, phobion, the pit of my danger. Abyss works too. Moving on to our theme, Augustine. Sorry, yes.
Mine says tides, my translation. So I was wondering if it's linked to the water stuff or not. How that theme keeps popping up.
For abyss?
Or for no the tides of my feelings. I think it's for the fiery one or whatever.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I wouldn't have translated that as tides though, because it's has more to do with heat.
Gotcha.
Or that's at least my interpretation. Continuing with our theme on ambition, Ambrose has something that Augustine is seeking: honor. He is given honor by the great and powerful, and remember from last time, Ambrose had influence over the teenage emperor and his, albeit Arian, mother. But Augustine is careful to note that he lacks the lust of the flesh, right? He has all this honor, but he's not affected by the lust of the flesh because of his celibacy. And so this gives us a great example. When he is not busy hearing cases, he says he restored either his body with necessary food or his mind by reading. This is the right care of our bodies and minds, to which the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes are opposed as excessive. Also, it's good to remember that the manic elect, who would eat material food to free the light, that particle of light, whereas Ambrose eats spiritual food in order to be a conduit for the light. Also, we might say, and this is a good question, I don't know if anyone has really answered this yet, is Augustine makes a big deal about Ambrose reading silently, that it was just customary or habit for people to move their mouth, to read out loud when they read. Kind of like maybe how children do. But that's how everyone did, apparently. And I think it's a good question. Why is that significant? Why is it just because it was relatively novel? Like what is Augustine? Is Augustine trying to tell us something by pointing that out to us? Any thoughts or ideas?
Well, he did say that he needs to preserve his voice for his, further talks.
Yeah, it's a practical thing. Yeah.
He doesn't feel like he needs to be heard.
Yeah, well, what he means is that you would, when you would read to yourself, you would just read it out loud to yourself. Maybe in a whisper or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how they would do that, but that's what he means. Is he reads without even moving his lips, not mouthing the words out.
Just suggest a higher intelligence.
I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit mystified. Maybe it's hard to give an answer because we're so far from that concept because we learn at such an early age to read to ourselves. But that is typically where you begin though, right? Sounding out the words and reading out loud. This is my suggestion, or one possible answer, is that this participates in our theme of moving from matter to spirit, of moving from the external to the internal. Other people read externally with their bodies and with sound, whereas Ambrose reads internally with his spirit. He gets to the heart of the matter without having to go through as many intermediaries. Just like with reading the Bible, going from the letter to the spirit of the Bible. And not being stuck where Augustine is in the external image, in the physical manifestation. Because Ambrose is leading him and Monica and everyone else from those more external things to that internal apprehension. That's my idea. Also, that good example that Ambrose is not listening to himself, but to the internal teacher. That for him to teach authoritatively, he himself must hear attentively the word of God speaking in the scriptures. On note 2, O'Donnell also points out that the having his doors open to anyone who can come in and preaching and explaining things openly and publicly, this is very important in contrast to the Manichees. The Gnostic sects were, by definition, they were built on secret knowledge that was revealed to you gradually, which is true for the Masons today. And this is an example of the contrary. Everything is out there. The Catholic faith presented by Ambrose is able for everyone to see. Another contrast with Faustus, while we're on the subject. Augustine seeks out Faustus for private guidance and finds nothing much on the inside. He seeks Augustine to examine his public eloquence, which is external, and then sees a deeper interior wisdom which he is kept at arm's length from. Augustine has intimate friendship with Faustus, but with Ambrose, as with God, he can't penetrate into that interiority. Again, this may have had to do with his old Manichaeanism or his political context that Ambrose is hesitant to talk to him.
How old was Ambrose at this time?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I don't think too much older than Augustine, probably, but older. I'm trying to think when he. I don't even remember when he dies. It's a good question. Also, Ambrose is here portrayed as a model. This is what O'Donnell says, that Ambrose is portrayed here as a model of episcopal conduct against which Augustine later measures himself. Moving on, paragraph 4. How are we doing? I need to move fast. All right. Augustine realizes, listening to Ambrose, that he had believed and assumed certain false things about the church, but still doesn't have a notion of a spiritual substance, and no longer thinks that Genesis means image and likeness in material ways, such that God would have a human body. This is important. He states his error clearly. His error was that he should have verified by investigation, but he simply asserted as an accusation. He says, in this, I was certainly rash and impious, that what I ought to have learned by seeking, I spoke in accusing. This is very important apologetically. That what he's saying is, he's not accusing himself of not believing the church, but of not investigating the claims, believing something false and making a decision based on poor research, on embracing hearsay, rash judgment, which is a natural virtue. That is to say, the opposite, right? The violation of natural virtue, which all can be expected to have. So, I talked to the attendant and the clerk who had his attendant in the grocery store today, who I'd talked to before. He'd asked me where the church was. And I asked him, I forget anyway, it came up, and so I asked him, why he wasn't Catholic, etc. And, he said he hadn't really considered it much. And so I said, well, shouldn't you? Right? Don't you need to, if you embrace your faith or whatever, don't you need to examine this first? Consider the claims of the Catholic Church. It's the one true church founded by Jesus Christ. You can't dismiss that without knowing it, without understanding what it is that you're dismissing. You're responsible for that. I said that those are similar words.
What did he say?
Not much. People don't usually say a lot, but hopefully you give them something to think about. There's not much of a response you can make to that. Because it's natural, it's a very natural conclusion. No, I don't need, what are you going to say to that? You can't say anything. You can't say, no, I don't need to examine things before I judge them. No one's going to say that.
Right.
Yeah. But what you're doing is sort of pointing out that I'm not saying you have to accept the faith now. I'm saying that just from you personally, from your perspective, you have a duty not to judge something rashly. Moving on. Paragraph 5. We have the need for philosophy. Unexamined life is not worth living. Again, his principal fault was not in believing a falsity, but in that he held uncertain concepts as certain in his mind, and yet betraying this, he professed them as certain. This is just like our Alypius story upcoming. Another way of looking at this is that regardless of the faith, many of our sins result because we do not look closer, but run forward blindly or half blindly. Like, I don't have time to figure out if this is the right thing to do, or I don't want to figure out if this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it anyway.
It was also the thing he was insulting the Manichaeans for, like last book, or Faustus specifically. He was saying
Right.
he teaches things he does not know.
All right, moving on to paragraph 6. At the same time, there are limits of skepticism. After having been burned by too easily credulity in the Manichees, our past Augustine wishes for a greater certainty than is possible in matters of faith. So Augustine, in the past, he wanted mathematical certainty, 7 plus 3 equals 10, on everything, things visible and also spiritual. But he says, a person who has experienced a bad physician is afraid of entrusting himself to a good one. The only healing was in belief. Difficulty trusting authority. The only healing was in belief. Difficulty trusting authorities. Belief after previous authorities were proven false. Now, I suggest that this is why, ironically, traditionalists struggle in trusting authority. Right? Because the been burned by authorities before. We also have the necessity of faith as a supernatural virtue. It is a power in the soul placed there by God, my mind's eye thus purified, which we are able to, by which we are able to see with supernatural certainty that which lies beyond our reason's natural ability, would have been directed me to some degree towards your truth, which abides forever and is indefectible. So in that one sentence when he says, my mind's eye purified, would have been directed to some degree towards your truth, which abides forever and is indefectible, again, gives us those parts of faith as a supernatural virtue that is placed in the soul, which gives us an ability to have a certainty that we can't, that exceeds the power of natural reason. Also, fun with numbers. Augustine loves numbers, and so any number that he gives you is never going to be by accident. And neither are 3 and 7. For Augustine, as in other places, he will say at other places, these represent God, which is 3 for the Trinity, and the commandments to do with God, and then 7, which are the days of creation, and the commandments to do with creatures. 10 is the number which represents God and his creatures, the totality of all existence. A little translation note, Chadwick says, as if he were most carefully enunciating a principle of exegesis. And that's true. It's a little modern language, maybe. That he would most diligently commend to them as a rule or guide. Might be better. I'm lacking the board for paragraph 7. But this is a fun thing when we're looking at faith and natural reason and the difference between that and what the Manichees say. Basically, so our reason is capable of determining various things to be true and false. And faith, what we know by faith, will tell us things that is impossible to know by our natural reason, but also things that are possible to know with our natural reason, yet difficult. Right? So for instance, that God exists, or the murderer is wrong. Murder is wrong. The 5th commandment is available to natural reason to understand. However, well, maybe that's a bad example, but some of the things in Revelation are more difficult to understand for everyone, and so shortcutting the natural reasoning process, God has revealed them to us. Certain things can't be known by natural reason, like the Trinity. So you can know that there's one God by natural reason, although a lot of people got confused about that, so it's important for it to be revealed to us. You can't know that that one God is the Trinity. So Revelation contains things that are not knowable by natural reason, things that are knowable by natural reason. But all the ones are going to be things that reason says is true, or at least says is not false. Whereas if you look at a false faith, like the Manichees, is going to reveal things that 3 different things that can't be known by natural reason, things that reason says is true, and things that reason says is false. I mean, that's how you know that that's a false religion, because reason can say, well, that goes against reason, that can't be true. This leads Augustine in this paragraph to consider human faith, that not all faith needs to be that we don't need to have mathematical certainty in the things of the faith, because we don't have that same expectation for natural things. Believe in what others tell you about what you have not experienced yourself. That's natural faith, human faith, right? Witnesses of history, friends, physicians, other people, and especially your parents. This might be, if anyone was confused about the end of paragraph 7, this might be a less confusing end of paragraph 7. Would be to say, they say, how do you know God wrote the scriptures? You cannot know through experience, but rather believe it, as one does who believes his parents to be who they are. Meanwhile, reason teaches, as does Plotinus, I am certain of the existence of God and his providential care over human affairs, and no arguments from mutually contradictory philosophers, for truth is one, can convince me otherwise. So this gives us I think this gives us an unspoken conclusion that a providential God would not permit us to be misled. Right? Because he's establishing he's giving us basically two principles here. Again, that we believe the God wrote the scriptures, just like we believe we're certain of the existence of God, even though philosophers are mutually contradictory about various things, and his providence. So maybe that was more confusing. I don't know, but I'll move on. Paragraph 8. We're going to come back to this later, but this is great. So, for instance, why didn't God just hand down the book of philosophy? Why are there so many stories and such in the Bible that seem ordered to the rude and uneducated? God writes to all. Some things are evident to all, and some deeper ones hidden for those with deeper intellects to find. The authority of the Bible seemed the more to be venerated, this is what Augustine says, right, in Chadwick. The authority of the Bible seemed the more to be venerated and the more worthy of a holy faith on the ground that it was open to everyone to read, while keeping the dignity of its secret meaning for a profounder interpretation. So the many, the hoi polloi, and the few can both read the Bible, and they can both profit from it, but the few gain a deeper understanding through the same text. Now we're going to, like I said, we're going to go into this much more detail later, but already you want to ask, how does this, so to speak, writing style increase the authority of the Bible? Like increase that this is our belief that this is divinely inspired. We'll say more about this later, but the shortcut is that God is all truth, and thus capable of telling multiple truths simultaneously. That God is the one truth, and the one truth contains all individual truths within it. There's no multiplicity in God. There's multiplicity in us. But so it contains all those things, which means that saying one thing, which is true in multiple ways, approaches God more. Right? That's why we like witticisms of things that have double meanings or things like that, because it raises up, it's drawing us closer. It's also what Augustine is doing right now. Right? Because he's telling us one truth about a historical truth that has a deeper theological truth behind it. Right? Like the examples that he uses, Monica, Ambrose, etc. That they're designed to do just that. Because everyone can read the confessions and get the biological parts and be like, oh, and get something good out of it. But there's a lot more, obviously, behind that for people to dive into. And this is, again, in sharp contrast to the Gnostic cults. The church tells the same truths to all. Some can penetrate them more deeply. The Bible is open for all to read, but it's the same truth, just understood more fully. The church has progressive revelation by depth, whereas the Gnostic sects have progressive revelation by addition, and sometimes even contradiction. because they'll be like, because you see this with the Masons also. You'll have like, this is what we tell people, and then when you get further, guess what? That was just a lie for them. This is the real truth. Also, this makes the church work like creation. Remember, you find God by going deeper into created things, whereas the Gnostic cults work by perversion and rearrangement, just like the devil, right? Let me tell you about God by adding things to creation that you can't see. Let me tell you the real reason that God doesn't want you to eat the fruit. Oh, good, we're doing pretty well. All right, going on to fixing ambition. Paragraph 9 is where Augustine hits rock bottom. Kind of, it's a joke. So, in grasping after honors, God mercifully lets him suffer the most bitter difficulties. That's our God mercifully striking him again. And we see why this is God's mercy at work, like with all the other instances, that it's actually worse to be successful in your bad pursuits, because then you are more encouraged to pursue them. And it's a mercy when they explode in your face, right? Like the prodigal son, if you will, is kind of God's punishing mercy that he hits rock bottom. He gets so destitute because that's what provokes him externally. It provokes him to turn internally and recognize that that his own errors are what have produced his awful state, which means that he has to fix those errors and not just fix his state, right? But he has to get. That's how he gets there. It's also, again, that's how we work, and that's how we work with less than rational people who are drunk or children. Is that people you like to be, oh, I want to have them motivated for the most perfect reasons. No, your kid needs to be motivated by the reasons that work best for him at the time, which is I'm going to hit you. Later, you move outward in. Okay? Fear of being punished leads you eventually to recognizing this is wrong. That's why I would be punished for it. And now I have a higher sense. I don't want to do this. Not, you can move more and more inward. I don't want to do this thing because it's wrong, not just because I fear punishment. But typically that's how we have to move. And that's also how you have to speak to people that aren't able to hear the best motives. So that's also how we have to speak to ourselves, too, when we aren't able to hear the highest motives. If someone is struggling gravely with a temptation to commit a mortal sin, well, your mind is so dark at that point. The lower motives are actually better. Fear of hell, right, or something like that is actually a more powerful motive than love of God, typically. If you're down to that level. Anyway, the prodigal son, that's God's mercy. God's mercy. Ooh. Little fun fact on lying. So there is a debate has been or is a debate in the scholarly community about the definition of a lie. Whether or not a lie contains within it the intention to deceive. Is it simply speaking against your mind, or does it need to be speaking against your mind with an intention to deceive? And St. Thomas says that the intention to deceive is the perfection of the lie, but it's not necessary. That it's just the speaking against your mind, right? Making a false assertion, period, is a lie. I hold one thing in my mind and I say a different thing in my words. And it's not, that will usually be for the intention to deceive, but it's not necessary to have an intention to deceive anyone. And so Augustine says a lot about lying. And so, for instance, he says this in De Mendatio 5, none doubts that it is a lie when a person willingly utters a falsehood for the purpose of deceiving. Now, some people get confused when they read that and think that's him defining the lie. if you notice, what he's saying is that that's certainly a lie. It's certainly a lie when you speak a falsehood with the intention to deceive. Right? But he doesn't say that the intention is necessary. Now, what does Augustine say in paragraph 9? He says, I would tell numerous lies, and for my mendacity would win the good opinion of people who knew it to be untrue. So, not a common proof text used in Augustine Online, because he has 2 books just on lying. But that makes it clear. He's saying right then and there, but he's saying, because when you deliver these panegyrics to the emperor, and you talk about, oh, how great he is, and everybody knows that half of what you're saying isn't true. Right? So he's lying, he's speaking falsehoods, he's speaking against his mind. And he says it's lying here, even with a recognition that people, his hearers, he's not deceiving them. He's not deceiving them because they already know it's not true. Which means Augustine thinks that the definition of a lie is to speak just against your mind, regardless of whether or not you're intending to deceive. It's more than likely the emperor he's talking about is, in fact, Valentinian II. That's what Chadwick says. And that's what Lancel say. O'Donnell thinks it wasn't. But I think he's wrong. Well, his point is that it would have been right after Augustine got there. This was delivered on November 22nd, the year 384, and it would have been relatively soon after Augustine arrived in Milan. But that's kind of why he was sent there. So he does say that Emperor and Bauto, the other one who sent it to consulship, would not have been an emperor. So that's why I think. Anyway.
So, Father,
Mm-hmm.
so he's saying an intentional lie people know is untrue. It's not to be sarcastic to say like,
No.
Biden's a good Catholic, right?
No, I mean, you could hear it that way, but no, because it's in praise. The emperor is there. He's praising the emperor to his face. The emperor is there. He's talking about, he's speaking eloquently about his military conquests and so on, and how benevolent he is of these other things. So in some sense, it could be, if you were to laud Biden about how faithful he was in his religion and all the children love him and things like that, then, I mean, you wouldn't be doing it in a sarcastic way, that's for sure. You'd be doing it in the way that he wanted you to hear and do it, right? Because he wants to present himself as a good Catholic. Meanwhile, so he's going out to deliver this panegyric to the emperor. He's driven by ambition to attain a false joy, and yet he is racked with anxiety and fury, a bundle of anxieties and fears. Small translation note, Augustine says that he and his friends wish nothing other than to come to a secure joy, securum laetitiam, which again Chadwick translates as carefree cheerfulness. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. And cheerful does work for laetitia, but all the cheerful words that Chadwick uses are for laetitia, our word for joy. A thing to note here, this is, if you like, a little key. Augustine doesn't name his friends when they're participants in something bad. He names them when they're participants in something good. That's why his concubine isn't named. That's why his friend who dies isn't named. That's why these friends aren't named. But God breaks his bones with the rod of discipline. While Augustine is lying to others, I skipped over this. We find the beggar, right? Now the beggar doesn't have true joy, but Augustine points out by these ambitions I sought a much more false joy. And the beggar, at least, was having a good time, while Augustine was not. That's his rock bottom, is he is secure and I was fearful. is that I'm doing all this work, and I'm just as bad as him, and yet I have nothing to show for it. No satisfaction at all. While Augustine's lying to others to please them, where he should be teaching them, God is teaching him and not pleasing him by showing him the beggar and his own anxious state. And then finally, before we break, the paragraph 10, he compares his false pursuit to that of the beggar. Why is he worse than the beggar? The beggar would sleep off his intoxication, but Augustine would not. Sins of the will are worse than sins of desire, passion, as they come more from you and less from your lower nature. The corruption of the higher is worse than that of the lower. Also in their state, the drunk actually feels happy, Augustine is anxious. And also in the means used to acquire joy. The drunk gains wine by wishing people well, but Augustine sought arrogant success by telling lies. So when he says, he uses that word for typhoon again, typhoon. And so literally in that sentence he says, while he acquired wine by wishing well, I, by lying, sought the typhoon, a violent whirlwind. We've seen this again, and previously listed by Chadwick, that's that wind imagery in connection with pride, with ambition. All right, and then finally with corruption. Yes, this is our bell curve. Ambition is the corruption of the most rational part of the man, which means it is cured more quickly because when you see, because your mind can move faster than your body, right? So when Augustine recognizes the absurdity of his situation, it's a lot easier for him to fix his desires for ambition. Whereas the sins, habits in our lower, in the lower parts of our soul and in our body are more difficult to get rid of because they move slower. Mind moves faster than your body, so it can change more quickly from bad to good. And that's why it's also his pursuit of ambition is his most recent pursuit. That's why he's able to quickly get rid of his desire for ambition, and the beggar helps him. But that's why his sins of attachment to sins of the flesh are going to linger for a long time. And we will take a break right here. Oh, how long? 9 minutes should be good. We'll come back at 2:20. Try to power through the rest. All right, continuing from a longer break than expected. We'll try to power through the rest of this. All right, we get to our this is our central part of the book, and it's our second side story on Alypius, who apparently is one of Augustine's hometown friends who's been with him virtually his whole time, and we're meeting him now. So, while Augustine is busy pursuing ambitio saeculi, the ambition of the world, Alypius is trapped in curiosity. A perfect example of this is Augustine is first worried about Alypius. Why is he worried about Alypius way back when? Because his passion for the circus might cause him to throw away a career of high promise. Right? His curiosity would interfere with his pursuit of it, with his ambitious pursuits. St. Thomas points out again that we will sacrifice. You can lack certain vices by having others. Like if you're a greedy man, you won't be lazy, and you might not be lustful if it doesn't serve your greed. You know, that's a waste of money, etc. That doesn't make you pure or industrious, because it's in pursuit of an evil thing. I think it's interesting to note, Augustine lingers with this idea of Alypius, this misunderstanding, Alypius's father not liking Augustine, and then him thinking that Alypius shared this dislike. I don't know if you wondered, like, why is he bringing that up? I think one of the possible answers to that is that it's going to reinforce. There's a theme in Book 6 of rash judgment, right, and the danger of rash judgment. So who knows the origin of the dislike? But Augustine rashly judges Alypius to think that he doesn't like him because his father doesn't, and that might foreshadow Alypius's own the rash judgment case, which we will see in paragraph 14. Another interesting note, moving on to paragraph 12, Alypius has no struggles with continence, quite unlike Augustine. And Augustine here seems to marvel at this, just like he does with Ambrose's celibacy. The distinction, though, is with Ambrose, it's something that he has chosen rationally, it's been willed, whereas Alypius, it's described as more of an innate virtue, which in fact does happen. There's some people who just have more of an innate virtue, just more given to purity. They just have less that is drawing them to impurity. And Alypius is one of those. Now, Alypius, in his current writing, is a bishop. So here is a big translation note. Chadwick says, a presider over your mystery for antistitem sacramenti tui, which more literally would be, obviously, bishop of your sacrament. There's only one other use of antistitem in the confession, and it's a reference to Ambrose in paragraph 2 of the same book. Lewis and Short, the premier Latin English dictionary, translates antistes as overseer, but particularly of a temple, high priest, and then later under Christian use, bishop, abbot, prelate. And so it should be translated bishop. That's how Augustine means it. It's also important because Augustine is just called God, you who preside or rule over the governance of all which you create. So Alypius, at the time of Augustine's writing, Alypius participates in God's presiding directly, just as in the past, Augustine participated in God's directing unwittingly or indirectly. Our flashback also goes all the way back to Carthage. Alypius sits in on a class. Augustine uses a pointed example to shame those who go to games, just like me using snookums here. But rather than get angry with him, as with somebody who is less virtuous, Alypius gets angry with himself. It's also good to see that sometimes a cutting word, if well applied, can do a lot of good, which continues that theme of the benevolent punishment. So now he follows Augustine so he quickly leaves his love of games. And now Alypius follows him, but he follows him into his Manichaean superstitions. In part, though, because he loves the continence preached by the Manichaeans. But this is empty virtue, either because it doesn't lead to God or because they didn't actually practice it, or both. And we'll see more of this in Book 8. Moving on, and moving a little more quickly again, just for time. We're still in our flashback in paragraph 13. Now Alypius goes to Rome ahead of Augustine. And in Rome, Alypius' curiosity rises up again, but there's a big difference this time. This time, Augustine isn't there. He doesn't have Augustine, and he has a group of bad friends. So this leads O'Donnell to suggest that Alypius' experience in Rome was like the pear theft, in that it was similarly impossible without the company and urging of friends. Again, friends who are left unnamed. So this is a great example here, his going to the Colosseum. In the higher part of his soul, he holds these shows in derision, but he still has a yearning to watch. Right? I know I shouldn't, but I really want to. So he decides, he goes in and keeps his eyes closed and sits in the stands. He has great self-confidence, right? He enters the stadium promising to overcome both his friends and the games. But when the gladiator falls victim and the crowd roars, then curiositate victus, conquered by curiosity. He opens his eyes, still thinking that he can look with contempt and conquer, vincere, but instead he is struck with a greater wound in his soul than the wound in the body that he desired to see. Alypius thus has a mind more bold than strong, writes Augustine, and weak because he's not trusting in God. This is a good object lesson for avoiding near occasions of sin. Alypius believes in himself and in his own strength. So he says, which is technically true, I can go there in the body and not look, or I can look and not lust. Again, all of those things are true, but they presume two important things: great strength of will, which raises the question is, if you have such great strength of will, why do you want to go there anyway? Right? Are you letting yourself be led? And, oops, I lost my place. Oh, and great purity and depth of virtue. And again, why would somebody who is pure and tried virtue want to test it by going to such a thing? So even before he agreed to go, there must have been some inclination or some affection for the sin, because if he had truly detested it, then he wouldn't have even risked it. Very interesting point here, and this is parallel to what we're going to see with the rest of Alypius' story, is this tension between the few and the many. Alypius enters the arena in possession of himself. Again, maybe a little divided, right? But when he surrenders to his base passions, he is no longer possessed of himself, but possessed by those passions. In which case the higher, his reason, is controlled by the lower, which is not the way it should be. And it's these base passions which were possessing all the others in the mob. So the mob is united on its lowest level, on the level of base passions, anger or lust or whatever it is. And that disintegrates him, makes him less himself, it lowers himself, makes him less human, less rational, and thus not the one who came in, but one of the crowd. And all this is because he put his faith in himself, not in God. Hence, pride goes before the fall. This also shows us how dangerous mobs are. They quickly descend into madness, but are united. Whereas the union of the soul with God always preserves the individual, the mind, so it's the exact opposite. It's also why spiritual friendship is more genuine than carnal friendship. Okay, it's very easy, this is a danger, this is another, among other reasons, this is a reason why fornication is bad. It's very easy to find a common denominator on pleasures with carnal pleasure. Everyone enjoys carnal pleasure. So you enjoy carnal pleasure with this other person is the lowest bar. Like, that's going to be pleasurable for you and virtually any other person of the opposite sex, right? It is not a spiritual friendship. It's not a meeting of the minds. It's, you don't actually know the person. You know the body. And again, that's why those things always go badly. So, meanwhile, we flash back to Carthage again. We were in Rome doing a lot of this was like, it's been nested flashbacks. This was a TV show. Like, oh, we're in Carthage. Now we're in Rome. Oh, by the way, let's flash back to Carthage again. God's providence. God permits Alypius to be falsely accused and arrested to prepare him as he was to have weighty responsibilities and thus needed to learn that one must guard against hasty credulity in condemning a man. So this is that thief story which I don't need to recount, hopefully. So, also, though, note, the real villain is a thieving student. Augustine cheats as a student. His students cheat him, and now this student is actually trying to steal from a store. Or is he like Augustine, who is trying to break his way into God's church? Now, we might ask some questions too. Is this story out of place? Is it just like a humorous morality play? O'Donnell notes that this also comes from Alivius' curiosity. Okay? Because he hears it, he sees, I'm going to go see what's going on. And then he picks up what's this? What's this here? Right? We have hasty credulity, again, the need for healthy skepticism. So again, is the story a misfit? Or where did we see Alypius last? And maybe this is why it comes out of chronological order. So we last saw him when he had lost his individuality and let himself become one of the mob. Now this story, the Carthage story, now he is a victim of the mob who, because they are an angry mob, rush to judgment having lost their reason, and it's the individual, the architect, who thinks, plans, judges, and saves the day. There's a contrast between the madness of the mob and the wisdom of the individual. Again, people will wonder what's the point of this? This is my suggestion to that question. Is this a misfit? What if it's a living allegory? Suppose that Augustine is the crowd giving hasty credulity to the Manichaean doctrines. Could it be that Ambrose is the architect who slows things down and gets to the truth, whereas Alypius is the Catholic faith? He's innocent, falsely accused. The crowd readily believes these appearances to be damning, and they're about to go off and execute him. Which, if we follow my proposed analogy, would mean that the real thief is Manny, with Faustus as his slave boy, who is too young and guileless to protect his master, so he transparently reveals his crime. Maybe that wasn't his purpose, but it does kind of fit if you put it together like that. So, because that's what does the thief in, it's his slave boy, who doesn't realize, who's just honest, and doesn't realize that his being honest is revealing his master's treachery. Just like Faustus, by being an honest guy, it actually exposes the errors of Manichaeism to Augustine, who had misjudged the Catholic faith, rushed to judgment with the mob, and so on. So, anyway, our flashback goes back to Rome again. Sound effects. Alypius is our innocent man in a corrupt world. Lawyers take bribes or fear threats, and so he runs afoul of a powerful senator who uses either these bribes or threats to get his way. Alypius will have none of it. The judge he assists wishes to refuse these bribes, but he is afraid to turn them down openly, so he throws Alypius under the bus, saying that Alypius he won't let me do it. But there's a good example in here. This is how one leads as an inferior. So Alypius is actually inferior to the judge that he works for. And so he doesn't command him, but he gives a good example by refuses to compromise on moral issues. So he doesn't command his superior, but he inspires him. This makes him like Monica, also like Mary, like Christ, a moral superior who lives his inferior status virtuously and thus converts his superiors thereby. Monica in her life was inferior to her mother-in-law and to her husband, but she converts them all not by command again, but by her example. Wives are inferior to their husbands, by the way, just so you're clear. That's your role. Last anecdote about Alypius: he is so sincere that he won't use his ability to have books copied for himself more cheaply because he works for the government. He won't abuse his power even in very small things. Augustine contrasts equitatem, integrity, with what Chadwick translates as integrity. Also, we translate justice, equity. Equitatem with potestatem, power. That he has a choice between potestatem, the power to use these scribes for his own purposes, but instead he chooses, instead of potestatem, he chooses equitatem, equity. Oh, also translation note, and I think this is actually kind of important. Alypius, at the end of the paragraph, we're in 16, at the end of it, Alypius attaches himself to Augustine and used to debate with me, is what Chadwick says. But really, it says, and used to waver with me in counsel, hesitant what manner of life to be adopted. So, debate is just straight up wrong. It's not like they were having an argument. It's more like they were both on the same page, but the page they were on was wavering. And we'll see what that debate, if you will, debate with me in the sense of together, like, oh, should we do this, should we do this, but united, right? Augustine tells us more of what that debate or talking together looked like later. On to another friend, 17, Nebridius, also a friend of Augustine, and all three are living together in Milan. They all want something better, but they don't know where to find it. Moving on to 18 and 19. Augustine is 30 and stuck in the mud, literally. He's trying to enjoy present delights which fly away from him, these fugitive delights, and dissipate him. They dissipate me. Chadwick adds concentration. They spread him out over temporal things, again like the prodigal son, quite the opposite of standing on solid ground and reaching out towards the eternal. Then follows a long soliloquy. That's why I'm joining these two paragraphs together, demonstrating the vacillation described above, that they would debate amongst themselves, especially the great communal desire to leave the vanities of worldly pleasures and the pursuit of truth alone. This debate is made possible by some initial stability. Let me fix my feet on that step where I was placed as a boy by my parents, the Catholic Church. We also see some foreshadowing, because in this debate, they say, where will we find the time and the books we need, and also keep up with our visits? So we have reference to time and books and visits. A visitor is going to provide this for them in Book 8, and that's going to be part of the key. We'll have to wait to get there. Summary of that debate. Life is short, time of death is uncertain, and if we don't learn what we need to know now, where else will we? Augustine asks, is there nothing after death? But he rejects this because of widespread Christian faith and that it's against reason that the deity would have done so much for us if the death of the body was also the death of the soul. And what would the point of us be being able to understand interior things and spiritual realities if we lived in only material reality? Going back to evolution, that's something that definitely the material world cannot give you. You cannot, if you lack reason, you can't get that. You can't evolve into reason. You have to be able to see beyond things or not. Animals see the things, they don't see invisible causes. And if you're the kind of a being that can see beyond the external, that means you participate in a world that is not material. Which means that when your material body dies, that part of you doesn't die. Because what can kill it? You can't stab something that is non-material. This is him turning more and more away from the ambitio saeculi. He's also fleeing curiosity. He's taking up that original zeal for wisdom. He's beginning to take that up again. Yeah, he's turning away, but he's not fully turned away, right? We'll go see more of that later. Paragraph 20, one of my favorite demotivation posters from despair.com. It's procrastination. It says, hard work often pays off after time, but laziness always pays off now. So these winds are pushing him to and fro. These are our ambition forces, and his disorder loves are pulling him apart, which is the source of his procrastination, but it's also the source of his displeasure. So it's not like the poster. He's not enjoying himself. He's being torn by two competing joys. That's going to keep going all the way through to book 8. Now he sees how it's the lust of the flesh that is holding him back. He thinks that he would be miserable without a woman, and that continence is a special gift that are acquired some resources he did not have. And it's true in the sense that it's a gift from God, but as he points out here, it's a gift that is available to all who ask for it with a firm faith. Moving on to 21. Augustine and his friends wish to live with carefree leisure. Securo otio, that's secureness. Alypius seems to have this innate tendency to chastity. So he says, yes, let's ditch women. But Augustine is still fighting it and offers examples to the contrary, trying to deflect this attention as one who is protecting a wound from being touched or examined. Augustine here in this paragraph also compares himself to the devil. He's using words to try to persuade Alypius, like the serpent's persuasions. He's also become like Faustus, that great trap of the devil. Moving on to 22. In the very first lines in paragraph 22, he says, what is the difference between? We see it. I'll cut it short. There's a great difference here. Augustine presents security that he longs for, and he contrasts it with a different kind of security, the glue of his pleasure holding him fast, right? Stuck fast in the glue of this pleasure. Augustine is chained by his lower passions. But we might say, well, isn't that another way of being secure? He argues with Alypius, comparing his brief experiences and the delights with Augustine's delights of my regular habit, to say that it was out of my power to live a celibate life. Literally, it was in no way possible for me to lead a celibate life. Virtue, that security that Monica has, virtue frees one actually by securing you in God in accord with your nature and makes you most free, whereas vice enslaves you, chaining your higher faculties to the lower. Now, of course, all of this talk about marriage fills Alypius not with lust, but with curiosity. He wants to know what this thing is about which Augustine's life would have seemed like torture without. And thus, like at the Colosseum, he moves from curiosity to a desire to experience. And again, in both of them, they were not moved by the duties of a well-ordered marriage and bringing up children. All right, moving on, 23. Monica pressures both Augustine and God for marriage. So here's where we see that one of the that's very nice about this, and other people have observed this too, is that Augustine is not presenting Monica as, a plaster saint. Like, she is a real person, and she has her own little errors. So first of all, this is a perfect example of how we can work ourselves up to a frenzy and see and hear things that's really just our imagination. And we must be careful not to immediately think that those things are from God. Discernment. Now, at least she is able to see that she doesn't have the confidence in these drummed up visions that she did have with the actual visions she had from God. Small translation note here. For some reason, Chadwick says smell for sapore, which means to savor, taste, not to smell. She says by a certain unanalyzable savor, which is much more accurate. It's also a perfect example of why we should not beg God for visions or other things like that, because the more that you beg and desire them, the more you get worked up for them, the more likely anything that you see will be attributed to yourself, if not something worse. Thankfully, Monica understands this and has little confidence in that. She continues to pressure marriage, though, and she selects a nice 10-year-old girl. Lancel says the girl was 12. Chadwick has her at 10. I'm not sure. 10 or 12, let you decide. When Augustine, also we should be careful to note too, when Augustine says that she pleased me, it was probably more than likely what pleased him most was her social status and expectations. It wasn't that he was looking at a 12-year-old girl and think she was beautiful. Maybe she was really pretty, but that's how you want to read that. That way of looking at it too, that she was pleasing because of her social status, her rank, and her expectations would fall in line with his current struggles with ambition, but also for Monica's. Here's how we see Monica's ambition for Augustine. We saw that earlier, remember? She was like, as long as her concern with Augustine when he was a wild teenager was that he didn't ruin his chances to be a great man in the world. Just so now, Monica has two goals for Augustine: that he becomes Christian and that he's a worldly success in that order. And the wife is going to serve both of those. She gets him hooked up with this good 12-year-old from a good family and high prospects and a Catholic family. Then, we'll have to get rid of the concubine. Then Augustine's going to become Catholic, and he's going to be on this perfect trajectory for worldly success. That's what Monica's thinking. That's what she's going for. She hasn't this in the right order, but she is pushing for her vision of what Augustine will be, not what God's vision is. Again, it's appropriate that this paragraph centers on Monica's vain and self-conscious dreamings. The more she pressures God to tell her what she wants to hear, the less she can actually hear God, who would have been telling her and Augustine something quite different. Ambition is a danger that can easily affect even the most prayerful people, especially if it seems to have a good motive, right? I just want to have this good thing, and I'm sure it's the answer. Like, God, why won't you just give me this good thing? Paragraph 24, now it's Augustine's turn to scheme. He and his friends make a plan to try and have it all, contemplative and married life. And now we meet one of his most familiar friends, Romanianus. He's been with him the whole time. He was unnamed earlier. It's Romanianus that Augustine stayed with before Monica let him back in the house. Remember, way back when, Augustine's a Manichae, and Monica doesn't want to let him live with her, but then she talks to the bishop, and the bishop says it's okay. And then he moves back in with Monica. He was staying Romanianus. More than that, Romanianus, in reality, he was a benefactor for Augustine all of his life. He helped Patricius. Remember how he had to sacrifice a lot to send him to a good school? Part of that was Romanianus paying for him. He is a mixed figure, though. He gets a name now, but he was a Manichae, and he's still a Manichae in the year 390 at least. So he had strained relations with Augustine. Even so, he does get a name now. So now he's being kind of helpful. But in real life, though, Romanianus, it's unclear if he really converted ever. So, anyway, moving on. That's just a little historical backstory. A number of them plan a contemplative community where they have nothing in private. They elect superiors for terms and so on. But it all falls apart because of women. Some had wives already, and some, like Augustine, intend to have them. Right? I think one of the reasons, or we could talk about why this, I will skip through, I'll just say this quickly. My view, and you can correct me, or you can have your own view, obviously. Why is this doomed to fail? Well, the nature of the family necessitates private property, right? A group of individuals can share a lot of things in common, but they can't share wives in common, they can't share children in common, and if you are a man, you have a husband, you have a wife and children, you have to provide for them, for that wife and those children, which means you need things to provide for them. So having families and community life of that sense is not going to work. Good news, though, this is the death knell for Augustine's ambitio saeculi. It's the exact opposite of the pride of life. He had the beggar, he has these other things. Now all he wants to do is go off and live in a contemplative community, which is again the hidden life, not ambition. Finishing quickly too, in this paragraph 24, we have a potential, I don't know the history, but it could easily be the origin of the quip. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So if you thought that was impious, then think again, it's not. Because what does Augustine say? By this counsel, you laughed at our own proposals or plans. Also, too, though, something like this will actually happen at Cassiciacum about a year later. But then it'll only be met at Monaco. And also seems to be recognized by all involved as a temporary arrangement. Paragraph 25, parting is such sweet sorrow. Augustine has proposed to his 10 or 12-year-old fiancée while he is 30. So now it's time for his long-standing concubine and the mother of his son to hit the road. She is so devoted to Augustine that she swears she'll never have another. Augustine, however, has to wait 2 years to marry that wonderful would-be child wife to satisfy, and so, to satisfy his habit. This doesn't heal his emotional wound. Some notes here. The language that he describes for the removal of the concubine as being plucked from my side. Right? It's been a while since we've had a very overt reference to Genesis, so there we are. Eve taken out of Adam's rib. This is also why the marital act is for marriage. One should be joined at the side to one's spouse. Something to keep in mind, it's not a danger for us, I don't think, but in case you ever run into it, sometimes you will find modern people accusing Augustine or other of the ancients of sexism, because he will say, and he really doubles down 100% on what St. Paul says, that man is the head of the woman. And Augustine goes into De Trinitate, he goes into great lengths describing exactly how that works, that man is a greater image of God than the woman is, and so on. And so some people, you could claim it to the ancients, but I think there's a lot in here that argues completely against any charges of sexism. So remember, Augustine has already shown Monica to have had greater faith and courage than many men, than the sailors. And his concubine to have greater virtue than he himself had. Right? But unhappy me, I was not imitator of the woman. Right? So there's a couple examples of women, of inferiors, who were morally superior. Meanwhile, he gets another girlfriend to bide the time, because he's a slave of lust. Then finally, paragraph 26, to finish this up, fear, death, and judgment. Augustine would have been even worse without these. He considers Epicurus, who thought that this life and its happiness was all there was, thought that this life was just, or that maybe heaven was just one unending bodily pleasure. But again, it would never really satisfy one without having the highest pleasure. He did not consider beauty not visible to the eyes, and thus he could not see at that time what was right before his eyes. So first we saw, he is unhappy to lose his concubine, not just because of the sex, but because of her person. He really was attached to her. He also recognizes that his friends make him happy by their company, their conversation, and thus there must be some invisible font from which these good things flow, their souls. This also demonstrates the immortality of the soul. The soul can perceive and delight in what is entirely spiritual, non-material goods, which means that it has to be like them to perceive them. It has to be spiritual to enjoy that contact with spiritual goods. And just as those spiritual goods cannot be destroyed, so too the soul, which needs no body to enjoy them, will live after death, enjoying or not those spiritual goods. This is also a good lesson on hell. If you hate all the food at the party, you will be unhappy as long as that's the only food at the party, right? So if you don't learn to love the food at the party before you get there, you will be very unhappy there. You won't be able to learn to love it then. As I became unhappier, you came closer. Just briefly, this works because his unhappiness is an awareness of his own brokenness and his disorder. So what displeases God, his sin, now displeases Augustine more and more. Right? So initially, Augustine's sin pleased him and displeased God. So they were in disagreement. It still displeases God, but now, more and more, Augustine's sin is displeasing him. And so even though he's very unhappy, he's getting closer to God because they share the same view of his sin. It's as bad and unpleasant. So that's how, as I became unhappier, you came closer. Finally, no rest for the wicked. Think of hell. His soul turns this way and that, and he uses these very bodily descriptions, like it's on its back, or it's on its side, it's on its stomach. But all these positions are hard or uncomfortable, Chadwick says, because you alone are rest. Chadwick says repose. That's requiem. But it ends with a promise not fulfilled. This book now ends with a promise which will not be fulfilled until the end of Book 8. Which says, run, I will carry you, I will see you through to the end, and there I will carry you. And that's what will finally happen at Book 8 when Augustine gives up. So, thus far, our class, I kept you a little late, but that's okay. Next class, again, will not be until April 15th, next day, and we'll cover Book 7. So let's stand and pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be, world without end.
I'll give you all my blessings. Nächste werden wir Betriebsrat für Experience. Schön, dazu los.
Thank you, Father.